Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our Sage 300 CRE Year-End Procedures session. This is session 2. It's a repeat of the session that we did on December 4th. We're going to be talking about the close year processes in most of the applications. Before we get started, I want to remind you that there are some handouts that are attached to the meeting invite. Right now, there's a closed job handout there, and there's also I've attached the PDF file for the year-end guide for 2018. So if you have a chance to print those out, we're going to be following those along as we go through the session today. Tina is also going to be attaching a copy of the PowerPoint that we're going to be looking at today, so you can have that to refer to as well as you go through the year end. So again, welcome to our session. My name is Jeanette, and I'll be your guide today. As we go through, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask at the end of the session, if you could type those into the chat area of the GoToMeeting panel, we'll take a few minutes at the end to answer any of those questions that come in. Otherwise, if you think of something after the session, I'll remind you that you can email those questions to Tina, and she will forward those on to me. All right, so let's get started talking about year-end 2018. We're going to talk a little bit about how to get ready for year-end, and then we're going to go through the modules, the applications. We're going to start with accounts payable. I've moved payroll to the end, so that if any of you do not have the payroll module, you're welcome to leave the meeting after general ledger. Otherwise, everybody who does have payroll will be covering that application at the end. We're going to briefly talk about some of the other modules like receivables and cash management. We're going to spend a little bit of time on job cost, talking about archiving old jobs and the transactions that go with them. I'm going to demonstrate the handout that is part of the GoToMeeting. So for those of you that have not been archiving, this will give you a chance to think about moving some of your old jobs out of the way and compacting your files so that your system will run a little bit faster. All right, backups. I just want to point out again, and I'm sure you already know how important backing up your data is. I'm sure that all of you have some form of a backup, maybe that runs at night, that's backing up your system. That should include all your Sage data. You might want to think about, if you're not already, preserving something off-site, just in case something happens at your office and you not only lose your system, but you lose those backups as well. The other thing I would want to point out here too is if you are rotating backup media, you want to make sure that you try to keep something that covers your year end, that you're not backing up over the top of those copies, or you might think about making separate backups within Sage for those individual applications. Because obviously, if something happens, we need to be able to go to that backup without having to rekey data. You need to have something maybe that you need to go back to for reference, for reporting. So, we'll talk a little bit maybe about backing up or having folders or a folder for the year end that you can copy your application's data into, again, just for that reference. The other thing I want to point out too, as far as backup media, be sure that you are testing that media every once in a while. I've had a few instances with clients where they've had to go to their backup and all of a sudden they find out that they thought things were being backed up maybe at night and the backup media was not picking up any of the backup. So be sure that you verify or test that media every once in a while to make sure that things are being backed up. The year-end releases, what's supported for versions this year. Sage just announced a few days ago that the year-end update is available. The supported versions this year are 17.1 revision 8 and 18.2.2. If you are on a lower version of Sage, you need to be thinking about doing an upgrade to one of these two versions. It's different this year. They're not sending out emails with links to those updates. They sent out an email that links you to a new Sage webpage that has the downloads there. So it's slightly different this year, but you're still able to access a website where you're able to download one of these two versions. Taxes for 2019 have not been released yet. You'll be getting an email on those as soon as those are available. You can go ahead and download the supported version without the tax update at this point. Additionally, you can download the taxes when they become available prior to loading the supported version. So it just depends on when you need to process your year ends and run your government forms. I would recommend that as soon as you get the notice on the taxes that you go ahead and download them, but not upgrade them until you're totally finished with the 2018 payroll. And we'll talk a little bit about that more when we get into the payroll year-end processing. Just a note for support closures, Sage and OnPoint are closed the same days this year, Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, and New Year's Day. A brief note before we get into the applications about paper. It's the same paper that you had last year. So blank perforated for W-2s, 4-part paper for the employees. You can do your test runs on plain paper. You can do your federal stuff on plain paper with black. It doesn't require a red copy like it used to. So W-2s again, using Atrix, blank paper for all the copies. If you are the one providing the employee copies, you need perforated 4-part paper. Same paper for the 1099s as last year. So you need you do need a red pre-printed form for the federal copies. You need blank 4-part paper for the ones that you're going to send out to the vendors. For your own test runs, just blank paper. Okay. Calculating the number or how much paper you need to order, you can run within Payroll under Reports, Tax Preparation. There is a W-2 count report that you can run. Under AP, under Reports, Miscellaneous, there's a 1099 preparation report, and that will show you how much paper you're going to need for your 1099s. Okay. All right, so let's jump in. We're going to start with accounts payable. We're going to talk a little bit about getting ready. Then we're going to go in and take a look at some screenshots or some screens inside the software. We're not going to actually run the Atrix forms, but we'll talk a little bit about running some test forms for both vendors and if you're accumulating totals by GL prefix. Okay, so for right now, you should be getting ready as far as having enough paper for the different forms that you need to print. Come January, we need to make sure that your year-end dates are set correctly in AP settings. You need to make sure that everything has been entered and posted. All checks have been printed. All manual checks have been recorded. Any electronic funds transfers that need to be recorded through AP that need to show up on a 1099, that all needs to be taken care of for anything dated in 2018. Then you should be running your preparation report so that you can see who's receiving a 1099 form, what form they're getting, and the amounts. So you need to verify that those are all correct. And then I recommend that you run a test run of your 1099s to blank paper. And again, verify those prior to actually doing the final run of the 1099s, again, through Atrix. So I'm going to jump here into the software, and we're going to look at a couple of things within AP. The first thing I want to take a look at with you is AP settings. So this is under Company Settings, AP Settings. You want to make sure that your dates are set correctly here, the year ending date and the 1099 year ending date. AP is one that you can forget to run the close year program, since it will allow you to process into a future year. So if you're looking at this and you see year ending date of 2017, prior to doing any updates for 2019, you need to make sure that you run close year so that those buckets shift around inside the master file so that you're getting the correct totals when you run the forms. The other thing you should check here is this option right here to retain 1099 totals per GL prefix. If you have your general ledger set to use prefixes and you need to provide multiple 1099 forms to the vendor based on those prefixes, this checkbox needs to have been marked so that you have those totals separated out within the master file in AP, and you're able to run 1099s by prefix. Okay. So let's take a look here. On the vendor setup itself, on the 1099 settings tab, this is where you need to make sure that the vendor is checkmarked to receive a form. If they are not showing up on your 1099 preparation report, this is the reason why. Now, even if you haven't marked this when you set the vendor up, it still accumulates down here in the 1099 amount paid fields every time you do a check run. So if you have forgotten to mark the vendor, don't panic, because you can come back and check the box and these totals will already be updated for you. Make sure that you've got a tax ID number in here in the recipient's tax ID field. It can be a Social Security number or a federal ID. Their tax ID name, the only time you need to fill this out is if someone is doing business as another company name. So you've got a company name up here in the top part of the screen, and you may have their name here in this tax ID name field. And on the form, it will print this name first, the tax ID name, and then the second line will be a DBA, and then it will print the name from up here at the top. The forms are listed here. It defaults to a 1099 miscellaneous form. If the vendor receives a different type of form, you need to change the bullet. If they receive more than one type of form, you need to do one of two things. You can set them up with a second vendor ID marked with the second form type, or at the end of the year, you can come in here and you can modify the 1099 amount paid this year or last year, depending on where you're pulling the amounts from. Modify it for the first form, print the forms, then come back in, change the form type to the second form, change this amount down here to the amount for the second form, and run the run for those forms. If you're going to have, excuse me, if you are going to have Atrix email the 1099s to the vendors, you need to check this box here, and then you'll need to provide the email address. And then as you complete the run of the 1099 forms through Atrix, if you answer that question that some vendors are going to be emailed, it'll actually come back here and pick up their email address. It'll pick up that they are to get an emailed form, and it'll get their email address. Right, so 1099 settings need to be set correctly. Again, under AP settings, your dates need to be set correctly. If you run over, let's say this is set to 2018, you can leave it there into 2019. As soon as the system sees the 2019 date, it will start putting those amounts into the next year field. If this is set at 2017, 2018 is in the next year field in your master file. You need to close the year before you run your forms to move the next year amounts into the this year amounts so that you're able to select that when you run your 1099 forms. Okay. The close year programs are under tasks. They're down here at the bottom. Close year, you need to run this to coincide with your general ledger fiscal year. So that date over here in AP settings, here at the top, this date should match your GL fiscal settings in general ledger. The 1099 year needs to be a calendar year. And then you'll need to run both. And this is where some people, they will remember they need to close year, but they'll forget to run both when needed. So if both GL and the 1099s are year-end, you'll run them both at the same time. If general ledger has a different year-end, when you close the year in general ledger, you'll close the year here, this first close year in AP. Now, as far as maintaining files, or maintaining your AP files, under the Tools drop-down, there is a Move Checks option. There's also a Remove Vendors option. Now, both of these are marked as optional. Depending on the size of your company, though, if you have a lot of vendors and you write a lot of checks and you get a lot of invoices, you should be moving stuff to history, once a year, maybe leaving a year and a half of information in the current master and the current file. What you need to remember with AP is that every invoice that you enter not only goes into the current file, but it also is written into that AP master file, along with all the distributions for that invoice. Then when you write the check, it writes a check record into the AP master file, along with all of the paid distributions for that invoice on that check. So your AP master file just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and then your reports will run slower and slower and slower. So what you should schedule like I said, about once a year is to move the checks to history and to maybe remove the vendors that you no longer use, and then use File Doctor to compact the AP master and the current file. Just moving the records out to history does not condense the file or make it smaller. The reports will still run as slow because it's still writing or reading through those blank spaces where those records resided. So you need to run the compact in order to get the file size smaller. And once you do that, you're going to see a huge difference in your aging reports and maybe some of your other reports that you run. Now, I've got a list here of the files that you should back up before you close the year or you do any moving. So these are the file names that you should make a backup of. And actually, in the back of your year-end guide, there is a whole section on backups using the file tools within Sage to do the backups, and then it lists out by application the files that you should be backing up. All right, property management is next. This starts on page 21 in your year-end guide. It's basically just walking through the month end. Property management looks like it doesn't have a close year. You just make sure everything is posted, make a good backup, and close the month. You do need to run 1099s through Atrix, and the ones that you would run are listed here, the 1099 interest or the 1098 mortgage interest. Right, the other applications, starting on page 24. We're just going to talk briefly about some of these. We'll spend a little time, though, on job cost. Now, accounts receivable is like AP. It runs on a year. So you haven't been having to close the month in AR or AP. When you get to the end of the year, you need to make sure that all your invoices and your cash receipts have been entered and posted. If you have any month-end reports like aging reports that you run, make sure that those get printed out, reconcile again back to general ledger, back up your data, and then close the year. It also has a move, and this one is pretty important because AR is another one that can get bogged down processing-wise for the reports due to a lot of transactions. So if you haven't closed, but moved any paid invoices ever to history, you might be seeing your aging reports running very slow. So you want to go ahead and, again, in some type of timely manner, either once a year or year and a half, you need to move those paid invoices to history and then use File Doctor again to compact those files. And as soon as you do that, you're going to see that the reports start running a lot faster. Right, cash management, same thing. It doesn't have a close month process, but it does have a close year. So you want to make sure that you have any 2018 adjustments entered and posted with Edit Register. Make sure that there aren't any outstanding checks or adjustments. Again, verify the year-end date in CM settings. Make sure that you're in 2018. Back up your data and then close the year. I'm just going to show you. Let me go ahead and open up cash management. Cash management only has one thing that the year-end close addresses. So firstly, again, in CM settings, make sure that your year-end date is correct. And then if you take a look at the bank accounts, there's only one tab that close year affects, and that's this tab right here, interest totals. It moves year-to-date to last year, and anything that's sitting in the next year field gets moved up to year-to-date. So there's only going to be something in here if you have recorded through Edit Register any interest amounts with a type of interest. If you aren't recording any of that or haven't, are not needing it for reports within cash management, these fields may all be zero. You still need to go ahead, though, and close the year. It's down here at the bottom. Now, there's also, under Tools, there is a Move Entries to History option, and I would recommend that you do that. If you've been on the system for years and years, and every time you go into Edit Register, you're seeing all those years and years of transactions, makes it hard sometimes and slow to find current transactions if you're looking for something specific. So I would use the move and move register to history and do a date range and get those old entries out to history, and then do a compact, use File Doctor and do a compact on your register file. Right, contracts, for those of you that are using the contract module for billing, there is not a close year. So just make sure everything is posted, make a backup, and then run close month. So it should be on the same schedule for closing as job cost. And then again, if you've got a ton of contracts sitting in there that are closed, are no longer active, totally complete, and you're having to scroll through those every time you go in to look at a current contract, go in and change the status on those contracts and then move them to history. Again, it's going to speed up your daily processing if you don't have to scroll through all of those closed or completed contracts every time you try to look something up. For those of you with equipment, it's the same thing as job cost. Just get your month-end reports out, make sure everything is posted, make a backup, and close the month. There is no close year program in equipment. For job cost, make sure that you've got everything entered in for 2018. Go ahead and print all your month-end reports. Again, make your backup. And I would, if you're reconciling back to general ledger, that of course that will be part of it. So anything that you do for month-end for job cost, you do the same thing for the end of the year. The only thing that I would add to this, again, is the move options here, and maintaining a set of files that you can easily report on. This is another application. As the files get bigger, the reports run slower. So you actually have two options here with job cost on what to do with your old jobs and your old transactions. The first option is just to move transactions only. Just move current to history and then compact your current file. If you move jobs with this option, you have to move the jobs to a different master file, a separate master file, because you cannot have named master files for job cost in the same data folder. Neither can you have multiple of the same name. So if you go with option 1, you're going to have transactions in your history file, but the jobs they might have been moved out to a separate folder. So they don't line up. You're not able to run reports on both the job record and the transactions at the same time. So what my recommendation is that you create an archive folder. And I wouldn't do the archive folder for each year. I would just create one folder, call it completed jobs. Now, you have a handout that was part of the meeting invite with the instructions for this. So I'm going to jump over here and go into job cost and explain. So what I've done here is I've created a folder called Sage Completed Jobs. So I went to File, New Folder, and I created a brand new company for this. And you can name it however you want. This is going to be the folder that you move all of your completed jobs and their transactions into all the time, so that the job record and the transactions are together for reporting. The second thing that I did is I went into file locations, and this is in your handout on page 2. I put a path name in for all of the places that the inquiries and the reports might need to go to get extra information. So I'm pointing back to my main data folder for the AP files, the AP master and standard, the AR master and standard, the cash management, the contract file, the equipment. I think I had GL in here too. Yep, the GL master file, payroll. The only thing that I am not pointing back to my main data folder is job cost. I'm going to have a job cost master file and transaction file in this completed jobs folder. All right, so once, actually, let me point out on page 2, there's a list of the paths, of the file types that you need a path name for if you are using those modules. If you don't have a path name in here in this completed job folders, when you go to try to run the inquiry, if that inquiry is designed to go get something out of one of those other modules, it's going to tell you that the files are not found, and it won't let you into the inquiry. Right? So these path names are strictly for the inquiry and the report designs. Right. The next thing that you would do is back in your main data folder, you will have on the jobs that are complete or closed, you will have come in here and you will have changed the status to closed. We're going to use the status field as a condition to do the moves. So let me close this. All right, so under Tools, Move, the first move you're going to do is Transactions. The reason you're going to do the transactions first is because we're going to use that field on the job record as a condition. If the job isn't there, we can't use it, right? The move you're going to do is current to current. If you go current to history, it's going to do it in your main data folder. That's not what you want. We want it to go current to current so that we can pick a destination. And the destination that we're going to pick is our completed job folder. Let me go down here and find it. Actually, Sage completed job. So I want to go to this folder. So again, pay attention to what's at the top of the screen. It's asking you for a destination. Where am I supposed to move these records to? So you're going to open up your completed jobs folder. It's going to have the destination file filled in for you. So just click Open. If the file is not there yet, just click OK to create it. So the first time you do it, you'll get that message. And then you're going to use the condition button here at the bottom. And you're going to index over to the job. And you're going to say that the status, let me find it, status is equal to closed. And then we're going to OK that and then start. And we'll watch to make sure it's done. And then we might as well go ahead and do the move for the jobs as well. So we're going to say yes to continue this. Again, the destination, we need to make sure that we are going to our completed jobs folder. And again, we're going to use a condition here that the status is equal to closed. And we may as well, if you're using commitments, go ahead and move the commitments as well. And we'll watch to make sure it's done. Okay, so now we can come back into Open Company and go over to our Sage completed jobs. And if we do an inquiry here, these were the two jobs that I had marked as closed. So the job records have been moved over. If I look at the transactions, so here is the list. It's got both jobs in there. I won't scroll through all of them because there's a lot of stuff in there. So all the transactions are moved as well. And then if I go back over to my main data folder and I take a look at an inquiry and I do a list, those two jobs are now gone. They're over in the completed jobs folder. Now, if something happens and that job needs more transactions posted against it, you can move that job back from the completed jobs folder back into the main folder and post more entries to it. Then when you're done, move it back and move current to current and move the new transactions over with it as well. Okay. So what this is going to help you with, one, it's going to keep your job cost files at a workable size. After you do the move, you're going to do Tools, File Doctor Compact, and compact the master and the current file. Second, it's going to keep all of your closed jobs and all the transactions that go with them together in one folder so that you can report on them at any time. So if somebody says, well, I need to see this job and it was closed back in 2015, you moved it out, maybe you moved it into a folder called 2015, but you don't know, maybe it went there, maybe it didn't. I don't know how many of you have ever looked on your system to see that you've got multiple year-end folders with job cost masters in there, but the history information is maybe in a history file in your main folder, or maybe it got moved over or copied over to another folder. So you've got jobs and transactions just all over the place, and trying to consolidate or pull them together on a report is impossible. So by using this option, you're keeping everything together. Now, if you haven't been using this option and you do have things in multiple folders, you can still pull all of this together. You can get the information. If stuff is in a history file, you can do move. You can do history to history and get the history over to the completed jobs folder. Then within the completed jobs folder, look at this option here, history to current. You can get everything back into one file, or you can just leave it in history and report or do inquiries off of the history file instead. So you've got a couple of options here that you can use to get all the transactions all back together in one spot and in one or two files. That's the important part. The second part of this is, again, the file doctor and running this right here, compact good files. Get those files shrunk down so that the reports run a whole lot faster. Okay. I think service management is just month-end reports. There's not for those of you that have service management, there's not a close month or a close year option in service management. All right, so we're ready to talk about general ledger. The one thing that I want to kind of harp on is not holding your general ledger open for months while you wait for entries from your accountant. Please try to close your year in the same time frame that you would normally close a month. So go ahead, get all the entries that you know of for 2018. Verify that there's nothing left in the new .glt file that needs to be posted. That's the review and correct rejected entries option. Make sure that there's nothing in suspense. Make sure that you've run all your month-end reports as they are now. Reconcile with the other applications. So reconcile AR, AP, job cost, payroll, cash management. Run your financial statements. Run a current ledger. And then make a good backup of your data, and then go ahead and close the year. You might want to go ahead and print a year-to-date ledger at this point, or you can wait. You can always reprint the year-to-date ledger for 2018 after you get those entries from the accountant. Make sure when you close the fiscal year that the number that comes up is the correct number. So you should have a financial statement that shows your net income or loss, and that should balance to the amount that shows up when you go in to close the year. If it doesn't, then cancel the step, and we'll talk about when we get inside general ledger here about what you need to look for if those numbers don't match. Now there's also a move command for current to history, again for general ledger. If you have been on the system for years and you've never moved information to history, you might think about doing this and compacting your current file. What I would recommend is that current only represents the current year. History represents all your prior years. When you close the year, it does write closing entries to retained earnings, and it records those entries in the history file as well. So you might as well move all the transactions that go with that over to history and then compact the current file again. So let's jump in here and talk about a few things here in general ledger. So what I'm talking about here is under tasks, close fiscal year, and you bring it up, and this number right here does not match your financial statement. So if that's the case, click the cancel. It has not closed the year. You're able to troubleshoot this, correct it, and then run it again. What the most common thing is, if you look under setup, and I'm using prefixes here, so I would look at the base accounts first. When you create a new base account, the account type defaults to a current asset. So even if I put something that might be an expense in here or income, notice that the account type does not change. If you forget to come over here and change this account type to either income, cost, or expense, when you close the year, the balance on this account will not be included in that year-end close. Even though you may have the account number printing in the right spot on the financial statement and it's totaling down to the net income or loss amount correctly, the closed fiscal year only adds up the accounts that are marked as income, cost, or expense, or other income. These four types. It will have skipped this particular account. Okay. So that's the first thing to check, is check your base accounts, correct the base account, and then you'll also have to come in on the full account over here under setup accounts, and you need to correct it here. Once you have done that, then go back into tasks, close fiscal year, and this amount should come up with the correct balance then. If that still is incorrect, then we need to take a look at whether or not all of general ledger is in balance. So at that point, I would just rerun a trial balance, make sure that you're balanced back out to zero. And after that, then you may need to get some help from one of the consultants or from Sage support. All right, so after you close the year, and again, I would run this in the same time frame that you close the month. Because you can go 6 months into the future with general ledger, the problem is you can't run future financial statements or current ledgers. So you can run a year-to-date ledger for the future, but that's the only report that's going to give you amounts. By going ahead and closing the year, we can do a prior period adjustment when you finally get those entries. We'll open up that last period of the year and post those entries there. So before we talk about that, let's talk about what happens when you close the year. So I already mentioned that it's going to create entries for your income and expense accounts to retained earnings. Then it clears out the current balance on the income and expense accounts. And then it advances all of the buckets in the GL master file. So the year-end balance is moved by 1 year. The fiscal ending dates and period ending dates move. And it also rolls all the activity fields on the activity tab. Those all roll by one, and then it pulls in one more future period field. Okay, so by doing that in the same timely fashion that you do the close month, you're able to go ahead and get financial statements for January, February, March, April. Maybe it's April before the accountant gets back to you with those final adjusting entries. So here's what you need to do for those prior period adjustments. Again, make a backup, and then you're going to open that period with tasks, open, close, posting period, and then you're going to go ahead and record the entry, post the entry, make another backup of your data, and then you're going to close the year again so that it closes whatever those adjustments were back to retained earnings. If you forget to close the year again a second time, your general ledger will be out of balance. Your trial balance and your financial statements will be out of balance. After you close the year again, you can go back and reprint your financial statements and the current ledgers for those periods. Use the year-to-date ledger option to reprint your ledgers. And then lastly, go back and mark that period as being closed. So let me show you what I mean here. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to close the year for Timberline Construction. Okay, and it's rolled in the new dates for the new year. We'll make sure that that's all done. Okay, then I'm going to take a look at open, close, posting period, and you see I'm now in January, and we can pretend that I've closed the month several times, so it's rolled down, but now I'm getting my adjusting entries from the accountant. So I'm going to go ahead using open, close, posting period, and I'm going to open up my year-end for 2015. Then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use record entries, and I'm going to put an entry in for 2015. And I'm going to just say that we're just going to use, I'm going to say maybe I had an inventory, apologize for the noise here, adjustment. Okay, so it warns me that I'm going to a prior period. And I'm just going to do an adjustment. And I'm going to make the entry for, I think depreciation is out here in the 6s. There it is. I'm just going to adjust depreciation for $100. Okay, and I'm going to accept that. And I'm going to go ahead and post it. Now, if I forget to close the year again, if I run a trial balance, let me get down to the bottom here, actually. Oops. Okay, you can see here I'm out of balance by $100. That's the entry that I made in my prior period with my prior period adjustment. So now, if I come back and I say close the fiscal year again, and I do it on this company where I'm not actually at the end of the year, I get the warning that I'm not at year end, but I've got prior period adjustments to be closed. And I say, okay, there's my $100 that's going to go to retained earnings. So I'm going to go ahead and accept that. And now, if I run my trial balance, I'm going to be back in balance. So let me get down to the bottom here. And now I'm back in balance. My ledger is in balance. My financial statements will be in balance. My ledger will be in balance. I do need to come back here, though, to open close posting period and reclose that period. Now, for the financial statements, under reports, because I have this rollback feature, I can reprint my financial statements for year end. So even though I've closed the year and moved on, I can reprint a balance sheet, I can reprint a income statement, just use the rollback and roll it back however many periods you're into the new year. Okay. All right, so again, for file maintenance, you need to make sure that you move transactions current to history and that you compact files. If you are in the middle of the year and you only move or you leave part of the year in the current file, again, you need to compact so that it frees up the space that those records were sitting in. All right. So the instructions for the prior year adjustments for general ledger are on page 31 in your year-end guide. So we're ready to start talking about payroll. So things that you should have ready in December, you've got the paper ordered if you're going to be printing your own W-2s. You've done the final payroll for 2018. You've gone in and looked at the W-2 formats, made sure that those, if you need to make any changes from last year to this year, I'll show you when we get into the software where to make those changes. In January, after everything for 2018 has been posted, make sure all the reports have been run, you've reconciled, you've got a good backup. You do need to go ahead. Most people are going to have a payroll that first week in January, so I don't think that last bullet there, deciding when to print W-2s, is going to be an issue. You do need to go ahead and close the year so that you can post that first payroll in 2019. Plus, closing the year zeroes out all the year-to-date fields, and you need those to be zero for taxes that have limits on them. So you're going to be running your W-2s after you close the year. And you'll have an option inside the Atrix program to run on the prior year. So that will not be a problem. Okay. So for the W-2 runs, make sure that you've got your year-end release installed. Do a test run to blank paper. And I would compare those. You should run some subject to reports inside payroll on the employee fields, and you should be making sure that those match up to your W-2s. And then go ahead and run your final forms through Atrix, and then e-file. Okay. Now, before you close the year, make sure that any pays, deductions, or fringes that have to be carried over into the next year are marked to be retained. Otherwise, they're going to zero out. On pays, this is going to be things like accrued vacation or sick or PTO. On deductions, this is going to be something like an employee loan that they're paying back, and you've set it up to be automatic and it has a limit. You need to be sure that that doesn't get zeroed out. Then you're going to go ahead, close the year, download your taxes, and download and update, that should say 2019. And then make sure that that's been updated before you run the first payroll for 2018. So let's go into payroll here and take a look. All right, so the pays, deductions, and fringes that I'm talking about, the field is this field right here. So it's under setup, pays, or deductions or fringes, and you're looking for retained year-to-date totals at close year. So make sure that anything that needs to be retained has been marked. The W-2 forms will be over here under Tools, Modify Forms, W-2 Forms. just pull up the default form if that's what you're using, and then on the Amounts tab, make sure that you've got the correct values for boxes 11, 12, and 14. If you're going to be running your forms off of last year fields, make sure that anything that's printing in these boxes, that you're using a formula for it. You need to create formulas that will do a lookup for these amounts in the last year fields. If you leave it just by pulling the actual deduction or fringe or pay, this is the current year. And if you've already closed the year, those values are not going to be there. Now, I'm going to go back into payroll for just one more second here. The option for taxes, under tools, there's a drop down here, and there's an option to download taxes. And when you get to this screen, there's an option to update automatically when the download is complete. You need to, or what I would recommend that you do is as soon as you get the notice that the taxes are available, go ahead and run the download, but do not check this box to update the tax files. By doing it this way, when you come out of payroll and you go back in, you're going to get a warning that there is a new tax file sitting out there, and to be sure to run update. This is a reminder. You can still run 2018 payroll with 2018 taxes, but then when you go to run that first payroll for 2019 and you get that warning, that's going to prompt you to come in here under Tools and run Update Taxes. And then that's going to update your tax tables. Now, to verify that your taxes have been updated, you're going to come in under then you haven't updated your taxes. The other thing you need to remember, after you download and update the taxes from Sage, be sure that you go in and update any percentages or limits on your state unemployments or any of your other local taxes that may have changed. Right. Maintenance again for payroll. Make sure you move checks, the 2018 checks, to history. But don't do it until after W-2s are done. Because W-2s, the Atrix software looks at the current file for some of its information. And then you also have the option to move terminated employees out to a separate master file, and then go ahead and compact your files afterwards. All right, that covers the major applications that you need to process for year-end. You should already have the link to the new year-end releases for version 17.1 and 18.2. The year-end guide, we attached the 2018 to the GoToMeeting, but it's also out online. So if you lose this one, or you want to have download it to store it someplace else or whatever, if you go to Help Documents, that will take you to the year-end guide. Sage, I haven't seen any weekly tips and common answers to common questions yet for year-end. They used to do that. I'm hoping that they will start to do that again. There's also a live chat option. So if you're having trouble getting through to phone support, because right this time of year is pretty bad as far as the queue getting through to somebody. It might be faster if you use the live chat option and type your question in there. I've been getting pretty good responses from them using that option instead of trying to get through on the phone. There's also, if you want to contact Tina, she can get one of us to give you a call back or email you back answers to your questions as well. And then again, don't forget the dates that we're all closed for the holidays. Right, so I want to thank you for joining us today for the year-end processes. If Tina, if anybody has typed in any questions in the chat area, if you want to read those to me, I'll be happy to answer anything.
Actually, we don't have any questions.
Okay. Well, we'll hold on for a minute to see if anybody asks anything. I'm sorry about the noise. I hope that didn't. I was trying to cover my microphone a bit to keep the yard people. I don't know why they do that to me every time we have a class. They decide now's the time. We're going to come trim the bushes.
Still not seeing any questions.
All right. All right. So if you guys think of anything after we disconnect, go ahead and send Tina an email, and she'll forward that to me, and I will be happy to answer any questions you might have that might come up later. And I hope that everybody here has a good holiday season next week. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. And I hope to see you in a future session. We'll probably start these up after January again. So have a good year end, and goodbye, everybody.